right, I'm kind of excited to... I thought about this picture, so let's see how this comes together. I think the Fords will catch on real quick here. So we're in Ephesians Chapter 4, so you can turn there. Ephesians Chapter 4. All right, so what I've got going here on the board right now is, and this can help for a little bit of review, but this is a person, in case you couldn't tell. This person, I know Jeff is a better drawer than me, but... So as we've seen already, and we do a review almost really every Sunday, is this idea that we are His workmanship. So we saw that in chapter 2. So we are His workmanship, and that's, again, this idea of His pottery, His craftsmanship. And what is said right away? I already have it on here as a clue. We are His workmanship, created for, and what good works. So we're His workmanship, we're His craft, we're His little pieces of craftsmanship in which, and He already says this in chapter 2, in which He's going to, for all of eternity, point to us and show us what He's done through this work. And He says that we're created for good works. Which, and how does that end there in that verse? What? Before that. Before that. He prepared beforehand. So He prepared in eternity past, He prepared these good works for us to walk in Christ Jesus. And so this idea of good works, what is the main good work that we at least the way I've presented this, what's the main good work that Ephesians is showing us that He's prepared us to walk into?
Peace.
Peace. Peace. Peace, and I'm not even going to review that part. You guys are going to have to click on YouTube, it'll be the 15th view or something like that.
15, that's a little optimistic. 3, and the first 3 were...
Did you see that? For all you older people who aren't laughing, it's a cultural thing. The 15 views is a joke, because that's like hardly anything. It shows how many people are viewing our YouTube things.
Hey, we got thousands. It says, like, when you look at the whole thing, it adds up.
Over the last 8 years? Half of those are you and I clicking. In contrast, I don't know if you guys saw that little singing thing that Caleb and Claire and 2 other friends from high school, I think has like 800 views. 800!
We all share.
All right, so this is interesting to me because the previous times that I've studied Ephesians, I could have made a list of all the different good works. And we can kind of talk about that in chapter 4 as he lists different characteristics that we are to walk in. But all of that is within this context of this main good work, which is peace. Okay, so you guys can review Ephesians, because in chapter 3 details that. The end of chapter 2 and then chapter 3 details this explicitly, because he uses Jews and Gentiles as this example in which the enmity is abolished and he's created peace by joining two hating parties into one, which we talked about is a God thought. It's not even a human concept, because the human view of peace is something entirely different. So this idea that he has created this good work for us to walk into, so far, the main one that we've seen in Ephesians is this whole concept of peace. Okay, so and we've talked about this for weeks. So I've got this kind of progression going on right now with this little illustration, and let's see how God, through Paul, kind of again continues to put meat and flesh onto this skeleton underneath this context of peace. So go to chapter 4, which we've already started looking at last week, and he says, "I therefore," this is verse 1, "a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling." So that's why I've got this. What I'm going to add over here is this. So we've got his workmanship. And this idea of calling, I'm going to put really under this kind of around this person, because, and we talked about the definition last week of calling, but I looked at that again this week, and that Greek word, which I think is, again, just, it's so simplistic, but it's phenomenal. The Greek word actually says it's used of God inviting all people to receive His gift of salvation. So I know we talked about, you think of calling, you think of, it was said last week, a vocation, and a job in a positive sense, not in a negative sense, but in a positive sense. But I like that idea, especially as we've talked about the Philippians passage. As we dove into peace, we talked about the Philippians passage for, about 5 weeks, that says, do not be anxious for anything, but in everything through prayer and petition. That idea of prayer mixed with petition is this idea of an urgent cry for help. The rest of that verse goes into talking about, and you'll experience, and the peace of God, which surpasses understanding, will guard your hearts and minds. So we talked about that extensively. But that idea, this activity of praying, petition, is this idea of, with everything that we've talked about regarding the kingship stuff. Me, little king, pushing aside the big king. The whole idea of salvation, now that we understand it, is this idea that I realize that I can't do what I have burdened myself with. I can no longer bear this burden that I've voluntarily taken of kingship, because that's not what I was meant for. That this idea of what I was created for is basically what? What am I created for? I mean, aside from what we're just talking about right here. Just what we always talk about. What are we as the creatures created for?
I'll go.
Go.
Bottom line, from God's mind, I believe we're created for a relationship with Him.
So I'll say relationship with God, and then tied to that relationship, I'll say, is the reality of the situation is dependence on God. Okay, and so the bottom line of me being the king is what? Independence, autonomy, everything we say every Sunday. My craving for autonomy is a craving for independence, which is bearing the burden of kingship, which is not what I was intended to be and do. The intention of God is we're in total dependence on Him, and that's a fantastic thing. Okay, so we're created for a relationship with God, which entirely has to do with this idea of dependence on God. Okay, so this calling, which I love that definition right there in the Greek, is this idea of God inviting all people to receive His gift of salvation. The divine invitation to embrace salvation in the blank of God. It's a quiz. But I just love how this flows with everything we keep talking about.
Give us the sentence again, now that we know it's
The divine invitation to embrace salvation in the of God.
Bible.
The kingdom of God. The kingdom.
It was kingdom of grace. So I went for Bible.
So isn't that interesting? This calling is embracing the invitation of salvation. It has everything to do with me recognizing my dependence, my need for God. That Philippians passage that's talking about prayer and petition. Petition being this urgent cry for help. I need help. Again, I'm not adding all the blessings of God. I'm not gathering things in my kingship that's going to make this thing better. No, it's me recognizing I am utterly dependent on God. And finally, I'm saying, God, help me. I'm tired of being the king. I'm in urgent need of help. I'm embracing His salvation. So that's what this calling is, which is awesome with Ephesians because, and we talked about the different times he used the word calling, but he says in laying out the blessings in chapter 1 is he says we're adopted as sons and daughters, right? And this idea of adoption is we're his workmanship. We're his beings. And now he says in chapter 4, hey, I therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you've been called. Now what is this calling? Again, the simplistic version is walking in a constant state of recognizing my need for Christ. And so now he gives this different way of living. And this, you guys can pick this up real fast because you've heard us talk for a number of different years, but it's contrasting, and I'm not going to write the little, well, we'll say that this side over here, since we've always had the left side, hey, that's fitting, isn't it? Left side be, that's little k, king, little q, queen. This is the, if we want to say the former way of living. We can add some stuff here in just a minute. So now he's showing us this different way, and this different way that I'm convinced of, even though I haven't necessarily actualized it in my life, but it's forming increasingly clearer in my head of what this is all about. It's this idea of freedom, this idea of kingdom. God has offered us to be, and he has made us to be citizens in his kingdom, which is contrary to my kingdom. It's different than my kingdom. This is burdens. This is full of burden, captivity. This is freedom. So I won't go on that tangent. So he says, I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling. So I love that idea of calling being this. Calling is this invitation to be a recipient of and live in this salvation, which is in this kingdom that God has provided. Okay? I think that helps me keep everything else in context. So he says, walk in a manner worthy of the calling. Walk. And it's with this idea of, I think, again, created for good works. So now walk in these good works that God He's already created. So let's look at this. He says, with all humility, gentleness, patience. Again, this has everything to do with, let's see, do I want to list this stuff here or underneath this idea of peace? We use those as action words, wouldn't we? And he's saying these as characteristics or nouns. They're not commands, but what's that? Attitudes.
We call them action words.
What's that?
I wouldn't call them action words. They're more your attitude of your heart.
Okay, so let's list them. Go ahead. Walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you've been called, in all or with all. What's the first one?
Humility,
All right, humility,
gentleness,
gentleness,
patience,
does this look familiar? Yeah.
tolerance,
Tolerance, long-suffering. Is there a different... Anything else? Yeah, so that long-suffering, I like this. That was the bearing... What's it say?
Each other with love. Or bearing one another in love.
Bearing with one another in love. All right, now we're going to get an action word here in a second. Bearing with one another in love. And it says what next?
being diligent,
Okay, being diligent. What other words do you have in your translations?
Endeavoring to keep endeavoring.
Hold on, what?
Endeavoring.
Endeavoring.
Yeah, endeavoring to give the spirit in the bond of peace.
Okay?
Make every effort.
I'm going to go ahead and put this over here. So being diligent, making every effort. Anything else?
It says eager to maintain.
Eager to maintain, being, making every effort. Oops. Eager to maintain. And here's why I'm saying we're still underneath this context of this main good work. And what is it? You just read it. Eager to maintain
Peace.
peace. Peace. Yeah, what else did you guys just say? I heard.
Says to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace.
Yeah, let's put it like that. The unity of the Spirit in the bond
Peace.
of peace. So that's where I'm saying we're still in this idea of peace. We're still in this work that God has created for us to walk in. He's saying, walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you've been called, with all humility. Isn't that interesting? I mean, that's everything we've written underneath. You got the heart of Christ, the other side of the fruits of the Spirit, the other kingdom. These are the characteristics of that kingdom, which is, again, showing us it's an opposite way of thinking and living according to this kingdom. If you remember last week, every one of these words has, what's it make you think of as in contrast to this normal king? There's a specific main characteristic difference as far as its intent. Have any idea?
When you are in your own kingdom, you are just thinking of yourself. When you walk with the Lord, you care for others.
So that's the distinct difference. This is self. This has an others mindset. All of these characteristics, all of these attitudes, whatever word you want to use here, has something to do, has everything to do with an other mindset. And it's a giving mindset, not the taking mindset. Okay, so we have these characteristics. And what I kind of want to lay out in the rest of Ephesians are the actions that we're invited into. And again, I'll explain that, or the way I like to think of that is this idea of being interrupted again. Because habitually speaking, how do we act? Without even planning or thinking.
Self first.
Self first. Any other ideas?
We use and take.
We use and take. So I won't go on a tangent. Yeah, we use and take, and we think of self first. So here we go. Let's keep going. This idea of unity. There is one body and one spirit, just as you are called to one hope that belongs to your call. See how now this is all tied to this idea of peace and unity? He's just stating fact. There's one body, there's one spirit. You are called to one hope that belongs to your call. Isn't that interesting? This calling, each of us in here are called to gladly fall into the arms of Christ and the salvation and the kingdom that He has to offer. And there's one hope, and that's what the hope is. So one hope, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father who is over all and through all and in all. But grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. And then, therefore, it says, and we've talked about this already, when He ascended on high, He led a host of captives, and He gave gifts to men. And verse 9, in saying He ascended, what does it mean? But that He had also descended into the lower regions of the earth. He who descended is the one who also ascended far above all things, that He might fill all things. Anybody have anything to say about that portion of Scripture before we move on? Or what kind of thoughts do you have about this whole He descended and He ascended? This idea of Him coming to earth. I mean, what comes to mind? This isn't a quiz question. Just Anything come to mind? Especially in relation to what we're talking about here.
He came and he descended and made this all possible.
So
His plan.
we talked about the upside down king, or this idea of a different way of thinking about a king. How does a human normally think about a king? What are the first things that come to mind? Majesty, glory, power, strength. What else?
I was just going to say that he came to save the world, not to condemn.
That's interesting too, because a normal human king is there to conquer, to assert dominance over, to acquire, to take. Even good kings in history, guess what they did? It's about obedience. It's about submission. Even the good kings in history, they had to have a certain amount of power and dominance in which they took in order to give to the people or the dominion that they thought was good. Okay? But Jesus is a different kind of king. It's an upside down king. He gave up all of his power. He gave up all of his dominion, and he humiliated himself by ascending to become a creature in order to give everything, which everything ended up being his life, his blood, his tears, his pain. It doesn't even make sense from a human perspective. Okay, so this idea of ascension, he ascended on high. He led a host of captives, and he gave gifts to men. It's just highlighting again even that calling piece, as he came to bring salvation to people that didn't even want his salvation at the time. So here we go. And he gave the apostles and prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity again, this idea of peace, until we all attain to the unity of faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. And let's stop there. So what this idea of equip, what does it bring to mind to you guys?
To put in place something that helps whatever you're doing.
Okay.
Various people are equipped for different things to bring about his whole plan.
I love how this kind of falls in right here. So we're created for good works, and then he's saying here, what else is he doing? He's equipping us for those good works. He's making us ready. Kind of the idea of equipping. He's giving us what we need. Again, the Greek word is this idea of exact adjustment, describing how he enables the individual parts to work together. It's a complete furnishing. The idea of perfecting. Yeah, great.
So I can be a master craftsman in whatever art, whatever I do, but if I don't have the tools, if I'm not equipped, so I see God as making us fully capable, which is making us a master craftsman, so to speak, metaphorically. But then also saying, and I'm going to give you the tools so that you can do it. So I'm going to make you what you need to be, and then I'm going to give you the tools to do what you need to do. So it's that full. If at the beginning I'm not a master craftsman, the tools do me no good. But if I have this ability without the tools, then I also do no good. So he says, I'll take care of both. I'll make you both. I'll do both for you, which is interesting because I spent a lot of years trying to equip myself for the work.
Do you want to explain that a little bit? Because I was just going to explain a distinction that, at least, again, how I'm seeing this is a promise of God that flows with what he already said in chapter 1, in which he says, I've adopted you as sons and daughters. I've placed the deposit of my Holy Spirit in your heart. He is proclaiming the truth about who he is and about who we now are. Because I mean, where I've grown up in the church, and I know it can be encouraging to some people, but this is it's still kind of a conditional thing. Like, God is doing this stuff, and you just need to somehow access it. Okay, now, somehow, there's this, I guess, an urgent appeal for, I don't know what the right word is. It's almost like this. God has created the conditions and the scenario for you to be able to take advantage of what He's done. Now take it and go with it.
Start writing checks.
Start writing checks. He's given you the pen. He's given you the ability to write. All you got to do is sit down and write them. Whereas I'm saying, especially the way that this is laid out in Ephesians already, this is saying, this is what God's doing. This is part of us being His workmanship. He's created us to be this and to do this. And now what Paul is saying is, now you can be free to do it. Yeah, Dave.
I was just going to say, in the Old Testament, it fits with what He promised, where He says, I'll give you a new heart with new desires, and I will place my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my ways and keep my statutes. So
Yeah, that's a great one.
but that ties exactly to what Paul was saying here.
Did you guys hear that? That's Jeremiah,
Yeah.
where he says, say that again, louder.
So I will give you a new heart with new desires, and I will place my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my ways and keep my statutes.
So again, who is the main actor? It's like this. We're the recipients of all of this. And I do really think that well, I don't know how I would. I do know how I would say that. I haven't formulated the thought yet. Again, I like the Galatians passage where he said it was for freedom that Christ has set you free. So it's this idea of now, hey, God has done this. Now be free. Live in the peace that He has created. Being aware of now this kingdom quandary that we're in, that habitually this is the way that you want to act. And now that you're aware of that, you can be free from it. You don't have to be the king and the queen anymore. Now you can be free to live, making every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace, instead of trying to insist and control and maintain my kingdom. So let's keep going. So now he says, so he gave this idea of equipping. He's given people in these different positions to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And he says that this is going to continue until maturity is reached, until that there's this fullness of Christ that happens. And then he says, so that we are no longer to be children, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves, and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. So what does that bring to mind? I mean, to me, it brings to mind this again.
I agree.
You agree? Thank you.
Some preachers that when they don't preach the true doctrine because they are concerned about themselves, and they think the way they interpret it is the right way, even though the Bible doesn't agree with them, or they don't agree with the Bible, and they are doing it to edify themselves, not to edify the Lord.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Just with this idea of, again, the normal DNA is this magnetic focus or attraction to self.
Mm-hmm.
What about the health and wealth gospel?
Yeah,
Stuff like that.
that's one example.
So you bring that up. So why would that be a doctrine that? And I want to be careful because I don't want to try to just list a bunch of doctrines that. But why would you say that, or why would that be this idea of being like little children, blown by every wind of
Doctrine.
And what is the health and wealth gospel or doctrine promise? Again, what is the kind of the focus there? At least in a general.
Santa Claus. God's there to give us anything we want. We just gotta have the right words and send enough money in too. Forgot about that.
Well, it's kind of like, when it relates to being children and immature too, it's like a child, they get blown back and forth on whatever is going to make them look the best. They're gonna hang around these people and do this because it's the cool thing to do. And then when it picks up, takes them over here, it's wishy-washy. Same thing with the health and wealth, because, well, hey, this is what's good for me. I'm gonna go over here. It's only gonna last for a while. They'll hear something bigger and better later. They'll go from whoever to Joel Osteen to T.D. Jakes to Cameron Dollar and get flown around. But
Again, you use the word good. And so we've talked about that extensively out of the Genesis passage. That this is at the root of our issues right here. Is that God gave us the ability, and we chose our version of good over and above God's version. So now everything that I do in life, in this DNA, is I'm determining what is good for me and what is not good for me. So this being blown by does anybody's translation use a word other than doctrine?
Yeah.
No? Is it all doctrine?
Oh, no.
Teaching. I think it's really important here that it can be easy, especially as people that have grown up in the church, have been in the church a long time, to really get distracted by that word doctrine. To where we just isolate it in, now I'm going to be the person that's pointing out all the bad doctrines out there. And I need to do that so that I'm not distracted by it. Whereas I think that word is more comprehensive and includes a lot more than just religious or bad doctrine. But it's this idea of teaching. Anybody want to expand on that?
No, but it does say about speaking the truth in love, and that covers so many things.
Okay, so you're jumping ahead, Sydney. You're always 2 steps ahead of me.
She's in context.
We're not in that context yet.
Don, don't feel bad, she's always too sensitive.
I was just going to say, is this the way you feel, Leonard? That was a good thing, Sydney. Dave.
Well, I think we're attracted to anything that makes us increase. I mean, and that goes back to what John the Baptist said, where he says, he must increase, I must decrease. It's just something that we naturally kind of buck against. And even as Christians, that's still the battle. It's still the fight against really my desire to make the most of me.
That's why I think this idea of calling and putting it in this context of, hey, this calling is, I am in this now perpetual cry for help to the Creator who gives me help all the time. So this concept of, hey, this is what He's called me to. He's called me into this relationship in which I am dependent on Him. And all of these other things now, will remind me that I'm still falling prey to my habitual pattern of independence, which is bondage, which is a prison. So he says, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine or teaching, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. And he says, rather, and this is where we're going to get to this action word now, because it's still in this context of peace. So here's this action piece. Here's this thing that he's inviting us, and I still say it's in this context of being free to be this now. So go ahead and read that, Sydney.
But speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ.
Okay, so hold on a second. So, not that it matters because we're not reading the Greek, but I want to include all the action words now, whether it's a direct command or he uses, there can be a participle that he uses that isn't necessarily an imperative or a command, but it still kind of has the same idea. But I'll just call them action words now. So he says, but speak, and I'm going to use it as a command. Speak, ing would be, I'll just do this. Speak the truth in love. So he's inviting us to walk in this way. Speak the truth in love. So why do you think this would be, why do you think he adds this? I mean, do you think it's interesting that he says speak the truth? Speak the truth in love?
You know,
I mean, why do you think?
he
Words can kill.
speaks in other places of how you handle and speak out instead of being blunt and whatnot. Just that love covers a multitude of sins. As opposed to divisiveness in the group.
Okay, so first of all, what do you think? What do you think that love has to do? Why did he add love? Or what's the idea of love there?
Kindness.
Again, it's not just me by myself, right? It's again with this attitude here. It's this others. I'm in the context of others, and I'm in relationship with others. Again, this is going to show us just that what we keep talking about regarding the two relationships that God invites us into. Okay, we got the invisible one, which is about God, the relationship I have with God, which is invisible. But then the visible is what?
Others.
Yep, others. The other, and then others. Okay, so again, this what we're going to see is this activity, which is what we ended with that Philippians passage. Is this there is this? How do we access the peace of God? I know that's a weird way of saying it, especially the way we're talking about all the time. But I think that there is a how. We can, in a sense, enjoy this together, and he invites us with these different activities, the action words. And it's what the church, this community of help, is built for. So now, instead of, the normal way of living in our DNA that is focused on self, how does the activity work that's different as far as... Ouch. This is saying speaking the truth. I don't think you guys are walking around believing that you're telling lies to people all the time.
Well, if I'm on that side of the board and I have truth, it's going to benefit me if you do it. So I'm not here for your benefit. I'm here for my benefit, and I'm going to express what I believe is true good, good, that gets you to do what I need. Whereas if I'm over here, I'll speak the truth for your benefit.
So jumping ahead, Don,
Okay?
building up the body in love, and that's the purpose. You do it in love because that's the way that the body of Christ is built up. If you're doing it not in love, then it's tearing down the body of Christ.
Yeah, and again, I think that's highlighting the different kingdoms. It really is highlighting the different kingdoms. Remember how I talked about last week how I was almost all the way here and I realized, wow, this truck ride to church was really peaceful. And we didn't start by me saying, okay, guys, we're gonna live in peace on this trip, and I'm going to dictate to you what that's going to look like. No, it happened. People were nice. There was a great conversation. Well, this morning was the opposite, which is fitting for Father's Day. Okay. And I will tell you, I didn't think about this until just now, but every kid in that back seat and the issues that they had with each other, do you know, in their mind, in their little kingdoms, do you know what they thought? The words that were coming out of their mouth. First of all, do you know what they thought?
This is true.
It's their truth. Doggone it. This is what happened to me. And this is what your intent was. Every one of those three kids in the back, the little girl in the front wasn't involved. But they were engaging in this debate. And guess what? Each one of them believed in their own head.
That they were right.
That they were right. So and they were speaking truth with a little t. They thought that what they were trying to defend was their version of what was good, or what they were trying to call out as not good from one of the other members of the family. And it only resulted in, not just only, it resulted in what?
Not peace.
No peace. No peace. And even if one of those little kings or queens said, you know what, I have peace, I'm fine with this. I'm calling out this other person. I'm believing in this truth. I don't think it's good what this person did. And you know what? I've got peace. Of course, I can prove. In my mind, I can prove to them that there's not peace there. Just in the way the interaction was taking place, it wasn't out of love, out of concern. It wasn't like somebody came to the other person and said, "Hey, you know what? I'm concerned about you, Luke, Caleb, or Reagan." It didn't happen like that at all. No, it was accusatory, it was condemning, it was belittling, and it was just continuing to roll until the biggest king in the truck said something. Okay? And there was still no peace. But again, we could continue to say that it wasn't for the building up of anybody. It resulted in tearing down, condemning, belittling. That's this DNA right here. And it is burdensome. It is shackles like you wouldn't believe. And now he says, you know what, guys, there's a different way of living. That God has prepared for you. You're His workmanship. You're created for these good works that He's created. Now, you know what? You are free. I love this. But you are free to speak the truth and love to other people. For the purpose of building up, edifying. We're going to see these other words here in Ephesians. Yeah, Sydney.
But the trick is how to go about what you're going to teach, so I'll shut up. But it's the trick of how we take in Christ in order that it will go out to others.
Yeah, and I would say just,
There's a lot of unbelief on the part of humans, even us humans. And in order to take more and more of Christ in, there's a way to do that.
this is clear to me, but you say kind of the how piece. Well, number one, there's no $1 million answer to that.
No, but there's a lot of pointers.
Okay. I think you have to keep all of these action things, the speaking the truth in love, and we're going to see some more, all within this context of we're in a community of people that all believe we need help. We need God's help, and now He's created me in this relationship with other people.
We can try, and it never works. I understand that.
What's that?
We can try to live up to this stuff, and it never works. I understand that. Because we try on our own. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because you're looking like
No, not really.
I didn't think so.
Well, go ahead.
We can try to live godly lives on our own, and it never works. Because we try to do what we think is right, what you're talking about on this other side, and it just never works. But it doesn't leave us in a vacuum where nothing ever works. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, I think so. Well, go ahead, Tracy.
Try and see what God does even in the midst of our failures.
Absolutely, but that is only through the power of God.
Yeah. Well, because He's sovereign, He is working. So I could try it and, from our perspective, blow it, but He's still doing what He's doing.
That's what I'm saying, that without that heart, there's absolutely nothing that can be done on your own. But there is that heart, and there's a way of believing in that, and soaking more and more of Christ in so that the love of Christ is made known to you, that can come out and be shared with others.
Well, let's finish up this passage, but go ahead, Greg.
Well, what I hear is that word right there, dependence. I'm dependent to be able to do any of those things. It's not dependent on me or my attempt to do it or my plan on doing it or my schema as to how to do it or the boxes that I check trying to do it. It's that God has called me to this and then has, like we said, given us the tool, which is our dependence on Him, and His Spirit in us, and we are captive to Him, and we are His prisoner, and we are submitted to this dependence, and that's the only way that's going to work. As soon as I forget my dependence, I'm back on this side doing it and failing, or looking at the outcome, which none of this says to do. It doesn't say, and check the outcome when you're done.
Yeah, that's good. Because I want to say, to close this, with that word dependence. And maybe we can expand on this next week, because we got to end. There's a totally different attitude in a person who is crying for help, in a state of dependence on God and other people. And so this concept of speaking the truth, and just to close out the verse, but rather speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, being joined and held together by every joint, with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. And we'll explain that a little further. But again, it has everything to do with others. This other mindset. But I don't know how to emphasize more this idea of dependence. It has everything to do with the calling that we have, because that has everything to do with dependence. And there's a different attitude and mindset that is portrayed from a person that recognizes their need for help. So we'll bring that up. Thank you. You can pray for us, Dave. Go.